You know, I love the space of movies, of TV shows, of books, of video games. I love this space of opinions where you can look at something and see something that is so absolutely, unbelievably critically panned. And then you look at it and you go, you know, that wasn't that bad. I kind of had that experience again. The previous experience, Collide, which was critically panned. It was a bomb. I enjoyed immensely. Even though I acknowledge that it was a pretty bad movie, I still enjoyed it. It happened again with Pan here. The Warner Brothers, I want to believe it's Warner, yes, Warner Brothers' attempt at making a Peter Pan story, probably even a Pan cinematic universe. This film notoriously lost them a lot of money, and there are a couple factors for why this happened. One of them is the creative decisions in regards to making this movie. After watching this movie, I could start to see and form opinions, theories on the production process for how this movie was made, and a couple decisions made on how some of these things looked that made me realize this film was probably originally intended to be a PG-13 film, and then they toned down the violence to make it a PG film instead. For example, when a couple enemies invade a rebel hideout, we see guns firing and lots of explosions and various colored smoke. There's no actual bodies on the ground. The people just explode into smoke. And that's easily a thing you could add in post or reshoot it and then say that this is PG instead. There are some moments in this film that look like they could have belonged in a PG-13 film. There are some cuts that people receive, some of the combat where you actually see the actual blow to this person's head or a blow to a person's face or something. They cut away from it, they edit it around it, but they still show that there's a wound on a person's head, still bleeding and all that stuff, which usually would belong in a PG-13 film. So I'm thinking that they probably originally shot this as a PG-13 film, and then they had to re-edit it, redo some reshoots, some ADR, and add in some CG and stuff like that to tone it down to a PG release, probably because they wanted to release this for more of a family films instead of PG-13. There are a lot of these types of movies that were released around this time period, such as Snow White and The Huntsman, which I honestly really enjoyed. I think this might have been critically panned, but I honestly really enjoyed it. It was pretty fun. Not necessarily for Kristen Stewart's performance, but I really love The Huntsman, and clearly a lot of other people that love The Huntsman enough to warrant a sequel to this film. This film actually got a sequel. It's called The Huntsman Winter's War. I actually have that copy. I just don't feel like pulling it out. Anyway, this is PG-13. There's another movie that was PG-13. Also released by Warner Brothers, also released around the same time, roughly a year or two before they made Pan, and that would be Jack the Giant Slayer. This was also PG-13. So why did they make Pan PG, but they decided to make all of these other films during this time period where it was starting to get popular to start readapting older Disney movies that were originally Disney movies, but they're originally based off like fables and all that stuff, so they were actually in the public domain, so they could adapt that fable. They can't really adapt that Disney movie per se, but they were adapting a bunch of fables and releasing these in live action in a more PG-13 grittier way. And I honestly really enjoyed the Snow White, the Huntsman, Winter's War, even though this one's a little bit better than the Huntsman, Winter's War. I really enjoyed Jack the Giant Slayer. I thought it was a very fun movie. They were PG-13 experiences. They were childhood folk tales that were aged up just a little bit because the audiences that probably watched these fables as cartoons in the 90s had grown up, and it's the 2010s now. It's time to show them a little bit more of a retelling, a reimagining for fun for the whole family and all that good stuff. And that's what I thought Pan was originally going to be. I thought Pan was going to be a PG-13 experience, and it kind of didn't really pan out. pun not intended, and they made it PG instead, and that probably really hurt the film in a way, because I didn't really care about the colored smoke explosions. I thought that was a bad decision. There's poor decision. There were a lot of poor decisions in here, but there are a lot of decisions in here that I could actually really appreciate. There's some world building. There's some world building ideas in here that I think are deserving of some mention, are deserving of some merit. But the thing is that the way this world building, these ideas are shown, are not exactly told to you properly. They're probably not even told to you at all. They're not explained at all. For example, there's a scene where you get to see Blackbeard played amazingly by Hugh Jackman. I think he was one of the more standout characters. He's just over the top. He's very campy. He's very funny. And I do want to say, like with Collide, this movie, while it is kind of not exactly a good movie, it's still a very fun movie. I found this movie to be incredibly fun. I had a lot of fun watching it. But I agree, it's not necessarily a good movie. But I have to make that exemplification, is that not every good movie will be fun. For example, I can think of some incredibly amazing films that make me feel absolutely terrible when I watch it, and I probably don't ever plan to watch them ever again after experiencing them for the first time. An example would be Schindler's List. Watching that one time, watching through that whole thing and looking at that and looking at the terror and the torment and all that stuff that based off true story history, and seeing what these people had to go through, what they lived through, that nightmare, it really makes you feel terrible inside. But the movie is incredible. It is incredible. It was worthy of all of the Academy Awards and the nominations and everything that it won. It's a fantastic masterpiece of a film, but it's not fun. It wasn't meant to be fun. It was meant to tell you a terrible nightmare of a tale of a terrible nightmare in human history that should never, ever, 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 ever be repeated, ever, ever. And it taught you stuff. It made you think about things. And that's important for a lot of films to do, but that wasn't a fun movie. On the contrary, a lot of bad movies can be very fun. Very fun. You can watch it and you can have a great time watching it. An example would be some of the later Transformers sequels, like the ones with Mark Wahlberg. They're not exactly good movies, but they're fun. They're so much fun. I love them. I love watching those and just put them on, just let it play. Pan, like Collide, are on the lower tier of okay movies, or bordering on meh movies, but they're fun movies. They made a lot of questionable creative decisions, but watching it on the screen, you have a great time. You have a great time watching it. One of the things that made me laugh quite a bit was their decision on Captain Hook, making him more of like a cowboy western dude, and the way he talks, he sounds like Bones from Star Trek, and he angles his head when he tries to talk, and he shows his teeth. I loved every moment of it. I thought it was so absurd for Captain Hook, but you can't help but laugh at the decision. You can't help but laugh at Blackbeard's portrayal by Hugh Jackman here. You can't help but laugh at that. You can't help but laugh at the romance that's kind of forced and really fast-paced between Hook and Tiger Lily. You can't help but laugh at that, too. There's so much stuff in here that feels so incredibly absurd that you can't help but laugh. You can't help but enjoy yourselves. Now, if you're a big Peter Pan fan, like if you're like an obsessed fan, kind of like how I am with Tolkien, and when I looked at Rings of Power and I saw all the changes and that made me upset, you would be 100% valid and validated in hating this movie and seeing all of the changes that they made to the origin story to Pan and all of that stuff, and you would go like, this isn't the Peter Pan I remember, this isn't what I was expecting, this isn't, and you are 100% valid in thinking that. You really are. I don't want to take that away from you, because for me, this film is a farce, and it is a very fun farce. I could watch this and really have a lot of fun. And going back to what I was saying about a lot of the questionable plot decisions, going with Blackbeard here, there is a scene, roughly in, I believe, in the second act, where we have Blackbeard in front of a mirror, and he looks like a very, very old, elderly man. And then he sniffs something, I believe it's like fairy dust or something, and then it rejuvenates him to his younger appearance here. And it's never explained. It's never explained. It's never explained a lot of these things. For example, when Peter Pan first shows up to this world, to Neverland, to the Captain Hook side of the island, where it's all mines and horrible, bland and dull colors, the crowd is singing "It Smells Like Teen Spirit" by Nirvana. And later on they sing Blitzkrieg Bop. And it's never explained. You have no idea how or why this is happening. But I think I could give it a shot. Try to give it a shot here. Neverland is a place where people from any time period can end up going to, where people from various different time periods can exist in the same place at the same time. And I think they explored this idea with the 90s Hook movie, which is also a fantastic movie. It's brilliant, beautiful. It's far better than this movie, clearly. It's fun, but it's also a good movie. It's a fun, good movie. So that means it's way better than Pan, obviously. But in that movie, a bunch of the Lost Boys, if I remember correctly, the behind-the-scenes ideas here, like with Rufio, and all these other guys, I believe each one of these Lost Boys came from a different time period, a point in time. Like Rufio, played by Dante Bosco, I think that's his name. I think he was from the 80s, which explains his look, his hair, his getup, his mannerisms. I think he came from the 80s and he came here. And then another one was from like the 70s, another one's from the 60s, etc., etc., etc. And I really appreciated that idea, and I think they just needed to explain it just a little bit. There's some things that you do need to tell the audience, just a little bit. Like, I do appreciate the show don't tell method of storytelling. They do show a lot of things, but you kind of do need to tell this one here, like how he's just miraculously old, turning young, how fairy dust rejuvenates him. It shows that fairy dust rejuvenates him, but why does it rejuvenate him, and why is he old? What is his motivations? Where did he come from? Like, I want to know these answers creatively. I want to know more of this story. But it's just not telling me. I can infer quite a bit of things and use my own imagination to fill in the gaps, but the story needs to not have these gaps. The story needs to actually tell those gaps itself to be a really proper story. If you rely too much on your viewer to use their own imagination to fill in the blanks, then at that point you don't really need to tell the story at all. You can just let the viewer imagine the story itself. And you just have little bland bullet points of action set pieces and let the viewer fill in the blanks. It's just very lazy. And I don't think the creators, the writers, and the designers for this story are lazy at all. The ideas and the plot twists that they came up with are very interesting, and I really wanted to see more of where they went with it. I love the idea of flying ships, and I wonder if he was mining so much fairy dust that he has these fairy dust engines for the use of flying ships, and they fly based off fairy dust, and that's how they're able to fly, much like how people can fly using fairy dust. And that's the idea for that. He's using machines of war to make airships off fairy dust. I love that idea. I wish they explored it a little bit more, but they don't really tell you what the fairy dust is for. Peter actually asks Smee, who is one of the middle management guys at the mines where the film starts, where Peter ends up at. He asks me a couple questions, like, why are we mining fairy dust? What is the fairy dust used for? And Smee says, we're not really told that. We're just told to mine it. Don't ask questions. And I'm like, well, I'd love to have an answer. I'd understand Smee not knowing that answer, but I definitely know that Hugh Jackman has that answer, and I want to know what that answer is. I want to know what the fairy dust is used actually for. I know it's going to rejuvenate him, but how does it rejuvenate him? Why is he old here in the first place? How do people age in Neverland? I thought people didn't age here. I thought time didn't matter here. That's how people from all points of time can exist at the same time here. And I would have loved to see more answers with that. Like, for example, Blackbeard being the actual Blackbeard from the West Indies golden age of piracy. Near the end of his life, Edward Teach probably got lost in a maelstrom or whatever, and ended up in Neverland, and he consumed some fairy dust, and it made him younger into his prime of his life again, and he wanted to recapture the prime of his life again in Neverland, and then realized that the fairy dust was only temporary, so he needed a more permanent solution to keep him young forever, so that he could sail Neverland forever. That would have been a great motivation for this character. That would have been a great idea for this character. I'm inferring this using my own imagination, but the film doesn't actually tell me this. The film doesn't fill in those blanks. I have to come up with this story for him off my own imagination. Let's look at Hook example. Another example for Hook is why he sounds all Western and stuff, is that maybe he was a lost boy from the American Wild West. And during that time period, people died all the time out there, and the law was pretty weak out there because because the East was where everything was, and everybody was slowly moving out west. The law was slowly moving out west, but for a brief period of time, for a couple decades, things were crazy out here. And I wonder if he was just an orphan of, or maybe he got lost and his parents or somewhere, whatever, and he was out in the Wild West, and he ended up in Neverland. That's why he's the cowboy Hook. And that maybe he's the son of a pirate, or like maybe the grandson of a pirate from the golden age of piracy, or great-great-grandson, more like. But I would have loved to explore that for his background. Like I get the idea, I get the feeling that there is a story here. I get the feeling that there is a huge, massive world that this story's creators came up with, but they really did not portray it properly in the initiation, in the portrayal that they finally put it out in. They needed to portray it properly, and they just didn't. They what is the word I'm looking for? Jumped the shark? I don't think it's jumped the shark. They just didn't initiate it properly, you know? And Tiger Lily, a lot of people say that she's miscast and all that stuff. You know, I watched the Disney movie, the animated classic, a very, 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 very long time ago. I believe I rented the VHS tape from Blockbuster or something. Watched it once on cable on the Disney Channel or something, and I never saw it again. So my memory of the Peter Pan story is absolutely nothing. I remember Peter Pan, I remember Captain Hook, I remember Smee, and I remember Wendy, and I remember the crocodile. That's all I remember. Everything else is just a blur. I believe Wendy might have had a little brother or a little cousin. He might have had an umbrella or something, or a top hat or something. And I remember a couple of the Lost Boys were wearing animal suits and stuff like that. One was a little bit chunky with red hair, I think. But I remember nothing from this story. Nothing. So I'm obviously not a big Peter Pan fan. I appreciate the story, I really do. So when I watched this, I was basically a blank slate when it came to Peter Pan. So I absorbed this as a prelude to a Peter Pan story that wasn't the Disney movie that was actually told. It wasn't the actual fable that the Disney movie adapted either. So I was with a very open mind here, and I really appreciated quite a bit of what they were doing. And so I had no idea that Tiger Lily was really meant to be like Native American or something. So I can understand, and I do appreciate, and I do sympathize with that. And I do think that they should have made a Native American casting choice for this. But maybe the reason why they didn't is because all of the tribals on Neverland are actually from various walks of life on Earth, came from different time periods, much like how Blackbeard's group over there all came from different points in time. So maybe they're descended from people from Earth of all walks of life and different points in time, and they're all coming here from different. The story doesn't really explain it. It doesn't really explain it. You could try to explain and justify your casting choice of Rooney Mara as Tiger Lily, but you need to show it. You do. You need to show this so that I can actually get behind you, so that I can. The bottom line is, this story is a mess. But for the reasons, I have different reasons for why I consider this film bad than most other critics. The bad CG, the CG and all, how this whole film is shot in front, I don't care. I don't care. You could shoot your entire movie in front of a green screen for all I give a crap. I don't care. Neverland is supposed to be a place that doesn't exist on this planet. So if you green screen it for the entirety of the film, at least make it look like it doesn't look like it could come from Earth to justify having everything on the green screen, And that would be more understandable. You need to have some built sets, obviously, like the tribal settlement. You can have that as an actual set. Some of the mines, you can make that as an actual set. But maybe all of the sky shots and all of the surrounding terrain, you need to make it a little bit more otherworldly. You need to make it a little bit more justifiable for how you put so much CDG in. The actual CG itself, I don't really care about the birds. I don't care about the birds. Look terrible, but I found myself laughing at it for how absurd they looked in comparison to everything else in the movie. I found myself laughing. I love these birds. They're so goofy and terrible looking that I can't help but smile when they're on screen. So they're fine. I have no problems with them. They're just absurd. There's so many things in here that feel absurd that I love it. I do. I love this movie. It's a bad movie, but I love this movie at the same time. It's fun. I'm sorry. It's just fun to me. And I looked at this and I tried to justify all of the story ideas, and I get curious about how the writers wanted to create all this stuff and what was going through their heads when they made Captain Hook the way he was, when they made Blackbeard the way he was, Captain Hook the way he was, why they casted a white person for Tiger Lily. I want to know their decision-making process. I want to know their justifications. I want to know the world that they were trying to build. I could see some of it on the screen, but they didn't do as good of a portrayal in explaining and justifying their changes. I want to see more. I want to see and know more about this world, because I'm actually fascinated by all of the changes they've made. I am absolutely fascinated by it. Because Neverland is a place of imagination, much like Wonderland for Alice in Wonderland, one of my absolute favorite stories of all time. So, using your imagination to explain the world and make it all kooky and wacky and all that stuff is part of the fun of writing and creating stories for these worlds. So I want to know more. I just need to know more. And I use my own imagination for Neverland to try to come up with explanations for why all these things exist. And that works for me. It really does. And it actually enhances my enjoyment. Pardon the thunder and all that booming and all that stuff, if you can hear that. But it enhances my enjoyment for this story. It really does. And it might enhance the story for you to use your own imagination to try to fill in the gaps. Or maybe you want the movie to fill in the gaps itself, and I do too. I want the movie to actually explain these things. And that's why I think it failed so badly, is that it didn't explain all of these things. When people heard Nirvana smells like Teen Spirit, that is the question that you need to answer. You can't just leave that up in the air. You have to answer that question. But either way, it's fun. It's a fine movie.